Good evening. My name is Arturo. For over a decade, I worked as a truck driver, hauling cargo across vast stretches of road. In those years, I've experienced things some might call paranormal, especially driving through the dead of night. This story, in particular, left a deep mark on me. I was leaving Tijuana, bound for Tamaulipas, skirting the entire border. It was around 8 p.m. Fresh from a long nap at a truck stop, I felt energized, ready for the long night ahead. The roads were eerily quiet that night, almost deserted, which I usually liked. It was past midnight when something bizarre happened. A white van appeared out of nowhere, emerging from the wilderness, trailing behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone had pulled over to rest and decided to resume their journey. But this van, it didn't overtake me. I slowed down, signaling with my lights, inviting it to pass. Standard road courtesy. But it just lingered there, mimicking my pace. I thought maybe the driver was inexperienced, nervous about night driving, so I slowed even more, giving them another chance to pass. But no, they slowed down too. It was starting to get on my nerves. 2 hours went by with the van in tow. Annoyed, I pulled into a gas station, partly to use the restroom and grab a bite, but also to shake off this persistent tail. But as I turned into the station, the van did too, stopping just short of the parking lot, its headlights piercing the darkness. I did my business, but when I came out, the van was still there, waiting. My frustration peaked. I decided to confront the driver, to ask them what their problem was. Were they following me? Was this some kind of sick joke? I marched over, banging on the tinted windows, demanding they show themselves to stop being a coward. But there was no response. No movement inside. Threatening to report them to my fellow truckers, I watched in disbelief as the van suddenly sped off, nearly running me over. I was furious, but also relieved. I thought that was the end of it. I took a break, smoked a cigarette, then continued my journey, feeling a bit calmer. But around 3 a.m., the impossible happened. The same white van reappeared, glued to my tail once again. This was no longer funny, it felt personal, like a targeted harassment. I planned to stop at the next truck stop, about an hour and a half away, to seek help from other drivers. Suddenly, the van started to pull up beside me. I slowed, expecting it to finally pass, but it mirrored my actions, its window aligning with mine. I could feel the driver watching me. I honked, gesturing for them to back off, but then they started edging closer, dangerously close to my truck. In a moment of panic, I felt a jolt. They had hit my truck. I lost control, swerving off the road, crashing through a fence and coming to a stop in the wilderness. Miraculously, I was unharmed, but my truck was dead, the radio and my cell phone useless. There I was, stranded in the middle of nowhere, at 3 a.m., completely cut off from the world. And then, to my horror, I saw the van's lights approaching. The van parked behind my disabled truck, its engine shutting off along with its menacing lights. I was trapped, my heart pounding. I locked the truck's doors and grabbed my trusty knife for protection. My mind raced with thoughts of kidnapping or robbery. The lawlessness of the roads was well known. Minutes dragged by, yet no one emerged from the van. I wrestled with my fear, deciding to confront whoever it was. Clutching my knife, I cautiously approached the van. The darkness was suffocating, pierced only by the weak beam of my cell phone's flashlight. The wilderness echoed with the eerie sounds of the night. Reaching the van, I knocked on the window, calling out for a dialogue. "Hello? Can we talk? Please lower your window." Silence. I pressed my face against the glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to peer inside. The van was empty, just an assortment of trash, as if it had been abandoned for ages. I opened the door to confirm. The van was indeed deserted. The realization hit me like a cold wave. Who had been driving all this time? I hurried back to my truck, but stopped dead in my tracks. There, in front of my truck, stood a figure, barely visible in the faint light. "Hello?" I called out tentatively. The figure didn't respond, only gesturing for me to follow. Despite my reservations, I did, thinking they might need help. They moved quickly, and I struggled to keep up. The air was foul, reeking of decay. Then abruptly the figure stopped and stared at the ground. I rushed over, but they vanished. I scanned the area with my flashlight, shouting for them, but they were gone. I then turned my attention to where they had been looking. There, in the dim light of my phone, lay 3 lifeless bodies. They were in such a state that I couldn't even tell if they were men or women. I was horrified, my heart racing. I ran back to my truck, but the van was gone as if it had never been there. Desperate, I tried the truck again, and miraculously it started. I drove off, calling the police to report my gruesome discovery. Tears streamed down my face. I was shaken to the core. Arriving at the truck stop, I found a couple of my colleagues. They rushed over, seeing the distress on my face. I struggled to articulate the night's harrowing events. They stayed with me, offering comfort, as I was in no state to continue driving. Then my phone rang. It was a detective. Already at the scene I had described. They wanted to question me. Half an hour later, 2 detectives arrived. They asked how I found the bodies, what I was doing there. I knew how unbelievable my story sounded, but I recounted everything. As I finished my account, one of the detectives produced a photo of the white van that had been my phantom pursuer. My heart skipped a beat. It was the same van. The detectives exchanged a look, and then the truth came tumbling out. The van belonged to the 3 individuals found dead in the wilderness. They were students, journalism majors, who had been missing for weeks. They had set out for Ciudad Juarez to report on the missing women in the city, but never reached their destination. Their families had reported them missing, and the case had been a mystery until now. The detectives explained that the students had been fatally shot, and they needed to clear any connection I might have had with criminal gangs. I broke down, tears streaming down my face, assuring them that my story was the truth. After the detectives left, the weight of the night's events settled heavily on me. The thought that those souls, those young students, had somehow chosen me to find their bodies, to bring closure to their families, was overwhelming. This experience was the most harrowing of my entire career as a truck driver. It left me with a deep sense of sadness and an unshakable feeling of being part of something far beyond my understanding. Those empty, haunting roads will forever carry the echoes of that night, a reminder of the fragile line between life and the unexplained mysteries that sometimes cross our paths. Thank you for listening to my story. My name is Gerardo. I'm retired now, at 70 years old. But during my long career as a truck driver, I encountered numerous paranormal events. This particular story happened about 20 years ago. I was hauling construction materials from Nuevo León to the state of Mexico. After a 10-hour drive, night had fallen, a time I actually enjoyed for the quieter roads and a sense of peaceful solitude. As usual, I had music playing to keep me company when I noticed a figure by the roadside, thumb out for a hitch. In those days, it was common to see people hitchhiking, and I always stopped to help. This time was no different. The man, about 60 years old with tattered and dirty clothes, got into the passenger seat. I asked where he was headed. He explained his truck had broken down a kilometer ahead and no one had stopped to help. Offering assistance, I let him in, but he remained silent throughout. I asked him about the company he worked for but got no response. His torn, dirty clothing concerned me, but he stayed mute. After driving past the kilometer, I asked if it was further ahead. He just pointed forward, urging me to keep driving. As time passed, I grew nervous. There was no truck in sight, and I realized we were back at kilometer 62, where I'd picked him up. It seemed impossible. I hadn't turned around or taken any detours. Fearing something was off, I pulled over and asked the man to leave. He quietly got out, walking into the wilderness, and disappeared among the bushes. Another truck stopped nearby, and the driver approached me with a warning. He explained that the man I'd picked up was a ghost of a truck driver who'd died in an accident right there. For years, this ghost had been hitchhiking, luring drivers into his trap. Those who stopped for him often vanished without a trace, just like his friend who disappeared a year ago. The driver advised me that if I ever saw the hitchhiker again, to ignore him and drive on. I thanked him for the warning. His words haunted me. Why did the ghost let me go when he had taken so many others? The next anecdote happened to me a few years before my retirement. I was driving from Mexico City to Cuernavaca with a coworker. It was late at night and drowsiness was setting in, so we decided to switch drivers. Just as I settled in the back to sleep, my coworker called out, "Gerardo, look at that!" Peering through the curtain, I saw a creature walking on two legs, approaching our truck. It was still far off, but its gait was unnatural, almost chilling. My coworker asked if it was an animal or a person, but I couldn't tell. I urged him to drive away, but our truck was stuck in mud from recent rains. The creature drew closer, revealing a form like a bipedal ox. It stopped a short distance from us, its ominous presence paralyzing. I suggested getting out to move the truck, but my coworker feared the creature was waiting to attack. He believed in local folklore about malevolent spirits, but I was skeptical, despite feeling an oppressive, fearful atmosphere. My coworker recalled his grandfather's advice. If ever confronted by a two-legged animal in the middle of nowhere, flee and pray. We decided to use a religious icon I always carried for protection, and together we prayed aloud. As we prayed, the creature howled fiercely, sounding alarmingly close. Sweat beaded on my forehead. My legs trembled like never before. The howling gradually receded as the creature backed away into the darkness. Seizing the opportunity, my coworker directed me on how to maneuver the truck. We managed to free it from the mud and sped away as fast as possible. That night remains one of the most terrifying experiences of my career. I want to share with you a chilling experience I had in Sonora, Mexico. Due to my father-in-law's illness, we moved there for a while so my wife could take care of him, and I found work as a truck driver. Sonora, with its breathtaking landscapes, quickly became my favorite state in Mexico. One day, as I was preparing for a delivery to a remote mountain village, my supervisor asked if I believed in ghosts. I said yes, though I'd never seen one. He then warned me about a particular bridge on my route, near a roadside cross. He advised me never to stop or even look at the cross. His serious tone made me think he was joking, but his demeanor suggested otherwise. The day passed and the thought slipped my mind until I reached the last stop. The road was deserted, and despite my earlier skepticism, I couldn't help but search for the cross. As I approached the bridge, I saw an old, weathered cross, the kind you see at roadside memorials. A sense of unease crept over me, but I continued, trying to shake off the nervousness. After completing my delivery, I shared my apprehension with a local while refilling my coffee thermos. He ominously warned that my journey back would be the real test. This filled me with an intense, inexplicable dread. I stalled as long as I could, not wanting to face the return trip in the bridge. Finally, I set out, praying and clutching a saint's medallion for protection. The night was pitch black, and a light drizzle added to the ominous atmosphere. Approaching the bridge, my heart raced. I didn't dare look at the cross, focusing solely on the road ahead. Then I saw something terrifying. A black shadow on my passenger window, seeming to cling to the truck. At first, I thought it was branches or some dark liquid, but as I leaned closer, I saw eyes peering in from the roof. It was hair, not branches. Horrified, I sped up, praying fervently until I reached the next town. Stopping at the first light, I asked some locals to check my truck, thinking someone had hitched a ride. But of course, there was no one. The next day, my supervisor was shocked to hear my story. Apparently, the legend of the bridge involved a woman who runs across it, but no one had ever reported her climbing into a vehicle. Whether it was an illusion or something more sinister, I never dared to glance at that cross again, and I made sure I never had to take that route alone. On a different route near the border, I stopped at a trucker's rest area, complete with a small store, restaurant, and even a lady selling burritos for those in a rush. It was there that I met two old friends, Jaime and Roberto, whom I hadn't seen in a long time. As we caught up over dinner, the lady serving us mentioned the local legend of the Lady of the Abandoned House. I was familiar with the house. It looked like a dilapidated church and had been deserted as long as I could remember. Jaime suggested we go check it out after dinner. I laughed it off, thinking they were joking, but after some persuasion, I decided to join them for a walk to stretch my legs. I remembered hearing about this haunted house before but never connected the stories to the actual building. Roberto theorized it might just be someone seeking refuge, wanting to be left alone by posing as a ghost. As we approached, the house stood out with its unique triangular shape. When we got closer, someone peeked out from a high window. It was a pale figure, too quick to discern if it was a man or a woman. Roberto wanted to prove it was no ghost. We followed him inside the empty, hollow structure, resembling an empty church with no internal walls. Roberto kept looking up towards the window where we had seen the figure. There was no second floor, no ledge. The window was at least 6 meters off the ground, and there was nothing for anyone to stand on. Whatever we saw peeking out was floating in midair. Even as grown men, we were terrified. We ran out of there screaming like children. The memory of that floating figure still sends shivers down my spine.